So today my speech is going to be about epilepsy. Epilepsy is very important to me. I work for a company. We build a device that treats refractory epilepsy, and it's a class 3 implantable device. So I deal with people all over the world that is affected by this disease. And it was a surprise to me that over 65 million people around the world were affected by epilepsy when I found that out. Over 2 million people are actually affected by epilepsy here in the US alone. 1 in 26 people will be diagnosed with epilepsy in their lifetime. Between 4 and 10 out of 1,000 is the number of people on Earth who live with active seizures at any given time. 150,000 is the number of new cases each year discovered in the US. 1/3 of the people with epilepsy live with uncontrolled seizures because there's no treatments available. And 6 out of 10 is the number of people with epilepsy where the cause is still unknown. Today I want to talk a little bit about the history, the basics, and diagnosing epilepsy, along with some treatment options, just to give you a little bit of background on epilepsy. Where did epilepsy come from? So it originated in ancient Greek language. There had been records of epilepsy through the Greek civilizations as well as the Bible. However, epilepsy was not identified as a disease at that time. It was actually considered a supernatural event, and sadly, commonly people were thought to be possessed by demons. So they were treated like prisoners, sometimes isolated, and sometimes they were actually imprisoned because the general fear was to be scared of people who had epilepsy. So it was really sad. So not until about the 17th century that the medical community started looking at epilepsy through a scientific viewpoint instead of a religious one. And so around the 1880s, it was discovered correctly. It was defined as epilepsy by a Dr. Hewlings Jackson. He was a famous neurologist who really took some time, worked with some scientific communities, and was able to correctly determine that the characteristics was of epilepsy, and it was diagnosed as epilepsy. What is epilepsy? So a lot of people only know epilepsy as one thing, somebody dropping on the ground and violently shaking, and that's known as a grand mal seizure. In epilepsy, there's several different types of seizures. It's actually defined as a neurological condition which affects the nervous system. So it's also defined as a seizure disorder. Usually it's diagnosed after a person has had at least 2 seizures not caused by a medical condition previously, and it has to be separated by 24 hours. A lot of people say, what is a seizure? So a seizure is seen in epilepsy or caused by different disturbances of electrical activity in the brain. Some seizures are evident. You see people fall down to the ground. That's a grand mal seizure. And some seizures aren't. Some people will stare into space. Some people will have a lapse in memory. Seizures can come in all different forms, and sometimes we don't even know for sure what seizure types people are having unless we've run an EEG or some sort of test on them. And most times the cause of seizures is unknown. So people have asked, who gets epilepsy? When do you get epilepsy? And epilepsy can develop in a person at any age, at any time. It's 1 in 26 people, of course, are affected by it in their lifetime. Factors such as health condition, age, race may help determine the factors of epilepsy. Epilepsy is also the 4th most common neurological condition, which a lot of people are unaware of. More men than women typically have epilepsy. And new cases are more common in younger children, first years of their life. The rate of new causes of epilepsy gradually go down until age of 10, and then it goes back up at age 55 and older, obviously due to brain tumors and seizures, Alzheimer's disease, which can cause epilepsy in elderly individuals. And people say, well, how do we diagnose epilepsy? How do I know if it's epilepsy? So diagnosing a seizure is very, very complicated. It's like putting puzzles together, and associating a seizure with epilepsy is very, very challenging as well. It will include understanding your medical history, running several different blood tests, but also doing what's called an EEG test, which is a test of your electrical activity in your brain. Other sorts of brain imaging tests will be run. You have your CT and your MRI scans, and together they will collect all this information to understand what's happening in your brain. What electrical activity is the brain doing? What's the brain look like? and it can possibly understand the cause of seizures, but not always do they understand why you're having the seizures. This information, again, is put together, and once they diagnose that you have epilepsy, there are several different treatment options for people, and everybody is affected differently. So different treatments will be for different people. There's not one thing for people who have epilepsy. The most common treatments are medications along with medical devices. Like I had said, you have implantable devices. You have different diets. Sometimes a diet might help somebody, a specific diet for epilepsy. Alternative natural medications people have tried. And last time resorts, they have had people have to have brain surgeries. If they can isolate where the seizures are coming from in the part of the brain, if they can say it's coming from the left hemisphere or the right hemisphere, and can actually isolate it's all coming from one area, they will actually remove that part of the brain, which can be very risky. And sometimes people come out of these procedures worse than they went in, so it's a high risk, but typically it's because somebody has experienced epilepsy at a very severe stage and it's their last resort. So people will go in and have parts of their brain removed because this disease is so terrible. Refractory epilepsy is something I wanted to talk about a little bit as well. Refractory epilepsy is the most severe type of epilepsy. It's actually the type of epilepsy that my company's device will manage. Our device is to treat this disease by implanting a device that goes around the vagus nerve. It's an electrical current within the body that will interfere with the seizures. So when they have resistant epilepsy, it means that they have failed to become seizure-free with 2 or more medications, at least 2 or more medications. So the seizures are uncontrollable at this time. They've also probably had brain surgery, and that was unsuccessful as well. So refractory epilepsy is the worst form of epilepsy, and typically someone with refractory epilepsy can have anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 seizures, sometimes in a day or in a week, where somebody with a less severe form of epilepsy might have 1 or 2 seizures in a month or in a 6-month span. So as you can see, epilepsy and seizures can happen differently, more erratically, less erratically in different type of people at any given time. So in conclusion, as you can see, epilepsy is a very severe disease. It's also one of the oldest known medical conditions in man, and it's still one of the least understood to this day. I hope this presentation has been both informative and eye-opening, that you've learned a little bit of the history, a little bit of the basics, and some diagnosing and treatment options have brought you aware of this disease. I know most people don't know epilepsy in its true form. And to leave you today, I wanted to just talk a little bit about, or give you some names of people in history who lived with epilepsy, and most of them were very successful. So Charles Dickinson, Beethoven, Thomas Edison, and Leonardo da Vinci all had epilepsy and lived with it every day. So thank you for your time. That was a little bit about epilepsy.